Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the last day of the conference. Just some housekeeping things before we get started. The exhibit hall is open today until 5. Plan to stay for the closing keynote, the value of evidence-based practices, snapshots by Pennsylvania school administration and staff. Remember, in order to get continuing education credits, you must complete and hand in the verification form by the end of day today before you leave. You can access the PowerPoint and the handouts for the session via the website or the Groupio app. And we are also asking that upon the completion of each presentation that you give us feedback for the session with the Groupio app. So our presenter today is Jared Campbell. He's an educational consultant with the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network in Harrisburg. Before working at PaTTAN, he taught high school mathematics and served as a district curriculum coordinator for math and science. He currently works in mathematics and multi-tiered systems of support. Without further ado, Jared Campbell.
Save that. You might want to take that back. Well, good morning. So I've got the pregame jitters going on up here, just to be honest with you. About 15 minutes before I should have been set up, they said you're going to relocate rooms. So we tore everything down, built everything back up. I think I'm ready to go, but I'm amped, to be honest with you. I'm jacked up on coffee and just a lot of adrenaline for you today. So some of the things that maybe we want to get off the table is if I need to slow down, I start talking too fast, feel free to do that, okay? We are being live casted, so if you ask a question or something like that, I'll do my best to answer that in the moment, so feel free to do that. But I would say that there might be some times where I ask you to hold that and I come talk to you personally, and the only reason I would do that is if I feel like that's going to pull us too far off into a side conversation, and then I end up in a one-on-one instead of addressing the whole group, okay? So that would be the only time that I would do that. But this is my favorite conference, I have to say. Every year, this is my third year doing this conference, and we've done different content every year. And this is, although I work primarily in mathematics and multi-tiered systems of support, I've been working with our Autism initiative on the side as much as possible to make sure that when they say students are ready for math instruction, that I can go in with our our PaTTAN Autism consultants and provide supports in the lens of mathematics, but also keep that in line with ABA practices. So what I will say is I'm not an expert in behavior analysis, and so we'll address some things. I'll practice my vocabulary because I need to do that. But if you get to the point where you're asking real intense ABA questions, what I would say is you probably don't want to hear my answer if I would even have an answer. It may be wrong. So if you get into an intense kind of ABA type question, write that down for me, and I'll make sure that I collect all those, and I'll get you good answers to that from Mike and Amiris and Willow and everybody at the Autism Initiative, okay? So, good morning. I'm Jared, and call me that. Don't call me anything else. Please don't call me anything else. And so we're going to be talking about skills sequencing. And so this whole thing really evolved from the lens of when I would go in to consult on site, what we found ourselves doing was asking the teachers, what is it that you want to teach mathematically? And I can talk to you about how you might teach that, but are kids even ready for that? And I don't like to shut down the conversation that students are ready for that kind of instruction, but we want to approach it cautiously and make sure that we're doing it in a consistent fashion to make sure that students are ready. And I'll say this from the gen ed perspective. We hit grade level content, grade level standards, and the assumption is that kids are automatically ready for that. And I can tell you, as I focus primarily in high school algebra courses, a lot with incoming freshmen who came from various backgrounds in terms of everything from I had a long-term substitute and played PlayStation all year instead of math class because they didn't want to teach it, to kids that were in advanced Algebra 1 classes and were now taking a high school algebra class. And how to merge those skills and catch kids up. And what I can tell you is if you start teaching equations at the beginning of Algebra 1, every kid's going to struggle with equations, right? Because they don't have the prerequisite skills needed with the integer computation they have to do. Fractions understanding is weak. And so we have to shore some of those things up before we just jump into the content too quickly. And sometimes that's a drawn-out process. Sometimes we can remediate those things really quickly. In the case of this, we're going to talk about skill sequencing in that once you know what it is that you want to teach, how do you first figure out what kids need to be ready for that, and then how are you going to organize that content so that you can assess and then teach any pieces that might be missing for that content. So you can make sure that kids are ready. There's not scripts to this. You're going to see some examples that we've worked through along the way. I'll take you through the process because this is the process that we engage in. And you're going to see some chart paper up around the rooms because what we're going to do in the latter half of the session is you're going to get an opportunity to engage in this skill sequencing or saying, here's what I know about this content. Here's what I think the prerequisites are. Here's how I would try to organize that. And you'll get to see what other people in the room are thinking. So you won't spend 3 hours in your chair. It'll probably be more like 2 hours and 58 minutes. Thanks for laughing at that. That put me at ease. All right. So let's turn this on. Just in case you are interested, I do try to use Twitter. I'm not real good at it yet. But it is at Campbell_PaTTAN if you're interested in tagging me on anything. And of course, we have the at PaTTAN updates, and I'll key back into that. But we also, in the math initiative, use this hashtag PTN math. And that's just a way for us, anytime you post something that's math related, that maybe is something you learned through PaTTAN, or maybe is something that you learned as a result of you were brainstorming while you're at PaTTAN. When you want to share a best practice or something you're doing in your classroom with your students, that you can tweet it, you can use the hashtag PTN math. I follow that strand. And then, we can retweet, we can get that information out there, because one of the things that I think is really important is learning from the field, and the field informing the field. And some of the best learning that you've done as an educator has been with other educators, right? And so that kind of grassroots effort we feel is really important. Of course, the mission of PaTTAN is to support the Bureau of Special Education and build local capacity. So in terms of today, we should be building your capacity to think about what is the math instruction that I want, what are the prerequisite skills, and how am I going to organize those skills to build conceptual understanding there to know they're ready for that type of math instruction. Okay, so you should feel better equipped to do that when you leave. Although I'll be honest, you're not going to feel like an expert in it. I don't feel like an expert in it. There are times that we run into situations we're not really sure, like it's a problem-solving process. You're going to have to think through it. You're going to have to tag on to PaTTAN's autism consultants, PaTTAN's math consultants, other teachers in your building. It's a group problem-solving process. Okay, and of course, there's a commitment to the least restrictive environment. So just real quick for me, parents in the room, parents of students with autism, I should say, in the room. Teachers, love that. Administrators, okay. Other consultants. Anybody that I missed? Ma'am. Paraprofessionals, okay. I would actually lump you right in with teachers, okay, because paraprofessionals provide a lot of instruction. Anybody else? Speech. Okay, so you'll want to think about some of the language requirements as we work through today, and how you can provide insight into the skill sequencing as it pertains to the development of that student's language. Okay, real quick for me too, how many people have never attended a PaTTAN autism training or had a PaTTAN consultant in the room? So this is like first exposure to PaTTAN. Okay. How many people have attended the initial training, the intensive skills training, and they've got some on-site support? So a little bit of familiarity with PaTTAN and some on-site support. How many people have done the advanced work with PaTTAN? So we've got about a third spread across the board. Here's what I'll say. You should be able to glean some information no matter what role you serve and no matter what your experience is with the PaTTAN Autism Initiative, okay? Probably if you're down here in the intermediate or advanced trainings that you have and have been receiving support for multiple years, you might have some advanced ABA questions that you'll want to jot down for us so that I can collect those and get you some good answers for that. Okay, so word of caution, like any good PD presenter, be careful. Be careful, okay? A lot of what we're dealing with right now is a hypothesis. This isn't the answer. This isn't a program. Like, this is designing instruction for students. So when we talk about this, everything is kid-specific. And I don't want you to forget that you're the experts with your students. Okay, so I don't want any skill sequence that I happen to show you for you to say this is going to work for my student that I'm thinking about, because it may or it might not. And you might have to make some adjustments to that. So a lot of our work is really kid specific, and I don't want you to forget that you're the experts with your students. So don't take any skill sequence that we work through today to be the complete answer for students. It's going to be that starting point, or it's going to help build that framework for how you can design that instruction. Okay. In terms of research, we do our best to take the math research and the behavior analysis research and make sure that those two things are in alignment, but there is not a ton of research out there on students with autism and mathematics as it relates to ABA supports. It's a very narrow band. So it's not like there's 20, 30 years worth of research that we can glean from. So it's not going to be a lot of citation of other stuff, other research articles and things like that. But we are looking at designing instruction and lining up to the research that does exist through behavior analysis and through mathematics, okay? But ultimately, do not forget, you are the expert with your students, okay? That's one of the things, I can't say it enough. Just because I have a microphone on today and I'm talking to you about math, I don't want you to think that anything I'm saying is clean cut, like this is the answer and this is the exact way that we should do it. It always needs to be student specific. Anybody know what this is? Poll the crowd. It's an iceberg. What do you know about icebergs? There's a lot more under the surface than what you see on the surface, right? And we like to think about that in terms of mathematics instruction. On the surface, you may be looking at multiplication, right? And so we're ready to dive into multiplication. But what's under the surface of multiplication that those students need to have a firm grasp of before we throw them into multiplication? Because if we toss our students into content, any content, too quickly, and they don't have the prerequisite skills, you're going to have not just difficulty with the content, but you're going to have other issues pop up too, right? You're going to have kids that want to disengage from instruction. You're going to have behavior start to manifest. And that's not just true with students with autism. That's true in the gen ed high school math classroom, right? I go way over a student's head, and I'd rather be removed from your classroom and sent to the principal's office than look like I can't learn math. And that's kind of the reality of all situations that all students face. So that's kind of a visual of what we're going to be dealing with a lot today. We're not going to talk about a ton about that tip of the iceberg. Like if you want to teach multiplication, how should you teach multiplication? What we're going to be talking about is if you decide you want to teach multiplication, what's under that iceberg, right? What are all those prerequisite skills that need to be in place for you so that you can get into multiplication? So in terms of the session outline, I'm not going to read it, but we're focused on those prerequisite skills. You should be able to apply that concept to task analysis. So when we say task analysis, we're just talking about whatever the content is that you want to teach, that you can break it down into specific steps and say, this is the process I'm going to ask my students to work through. Because once you know that process, that's going to lead you to those sub-skills, those prerequisite skills that you need to make sure are in place for students. Okay? So our big outline, we're going to talk about some ABA stuff at the beginning, okay? Remember, I'm a math teacher. I'm not a board-certified behavior analyst. So I'm going to do my best to practice the ABA language. I have had people check it, but I'm not going to guarantee that I don't say something that maybe is a little bit off. And then we're going to get into instructional sequencing. We're going to look at that through the idea of teaching counting to a student. If we wanted to teach that, I'll do that one with you. I'll just show you what it looks like. We'll look at early computation and how we might approach early computation, and we'll look at some of that together. And then we'll get you into the create your own sequence, where I'll give you some topics and you'll team up with a group and you'll go to chart paper and you'll start mapping this stuff out and thinking about these instructional sequences and how you work through the process. Okay? Because the goal of today is not to walk out with instructional sequences, is to engage you in that process so that you can engage in that at your school for your students when you leave. And tweet it. I will say, if I say anything too ridiculous, don't tweet that. That happened last year too. We were already being webcast, so they're going to see it all over the place anyway. But I really want you, especially in the create your own sequence, take snapshots of what people are doing, the skill sequences that they're coming up with. Tweet those images. Use that hashtag for NAC20. Okay? Get that stuff out there and share with people that maybe weren't able to attend this session because they were headed somewhere else today and needed to prioritize something a little bit different. I will say that what we create here today, I'm going to be taking back to PaTTAN, and we'll be looking at those sequences and seeing if we can standardize some of that and solidify some of that and create some stuff that we can utilize as starting points in more areas of content. Okay, so this will inform future work today. Okay, so pop quiz. Math is a blank. Think about it. I give you 15 seconds to think about it. Math is a blank. I know some of you are having some fun with this one right now. Especially when I put phrase. You're going, I've got a couple key phrases. We're being webcast, I want to remind you. Okay, so we got to keep it PG in here. But what would you say as a phrase? Funny or serious? Math is a what? A necessity. I like that. Not an option for students. It is absolutely a challenge. In fact, I've always said this. If you haven't been challenged in math, you need to keep taking math classes because they keep getting harder and harder, and eventually you will be challenged. If you only took easy math classes, what are you really learning, right? Math, that's one of the things that's difficult for students is they feel like at some point math should just be easy. And by the time it gets easy, we take them on the new content, don't we? And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. So if you haven't faced a challenge in math, I would challenge you, go take another math class, right? It's going to be a challenge for students. We should expect that. What else would we say? Math is a what? Process. It is a process that we're going to engage in. Yes, ma'am? It's a language. And I'm going to stop with that one because that's, you win. If I had door prizes, you would get one. I'll sign my cup of coffee later. It won't be, yeah, I'll actually devalue the cup is what will happen. But mathematics is a language, and we talk about that a lot, but I don't know that that's permeated the field, because as a high school math teacher, I was kind of trained that math is a set of symbols and structures that kids need to learn, and they need to solve equations, they need to compute, and math is about getting answers. Math isn't just about getting answers. In fact, the majority of mathematicians find very few answers in their life. If they find one or two big answers, they are groundbreaking breakthroughs they'll spend their life working on. And sometimes they seem to be irrelevant when they find them, and then they go on to mean so much for the world down the road as they find out how that mathematics is applicable. It's not about getting answers. It's a method of communication. And the way we teach math should resemble that, just from the language or the communication with symbols that goes on with students. Okay? So we want to approach mathematics as a language or a vehicle for communicating about things that are happening. Don't ever lose that. Okay? The purpose of doing math to get answers should not be what mathematics is about. Mathematicians try to communicate about the real world and explain real world situations and phenomenon through the lens of mathematics. And so it is very much a language. Everybody knows this guy, right? Love this guy. But what I would say is, if we're talking about counting, he concerns me. Here's why I say this. If we want to teach counting, a lot of kids come into school being able to say things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Or if they've watched Sesame Street enough, it's 3, right? Or if they're singing, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, here's what I want to caution you with, and I do this all across the board with all teachers. Just because a kid has a verbal repertoire, or I won't even say that right now, just because they're parroting back language doesn't mean they understand the language that's coming out of their mouth. I always use the analogy or the metaphor of my niece, who is now 5 years old, and her mom heard her singing a Pink song in the back of the van one day. Not appropriate lyrics, right? Nobody knows where she picked it up, must have been on the radio, but she didn't know the words that were coming out of her mouth. She was just saying the words to the tune that she had learned. And so when we think about prerequisite skills, a lot of times we assume counting is where we start. That the first thing we want to do is teach counting, and so we just go in and we teach counting. And as long as kids have that ability to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then they've counted to 5. And they don't necessarily have that. If we take that for granted, we start to run into more and more misconceptions as we go down the road. One of the major issues with all kids that struggle in math is an over-reliance on one-to-one correspondence, meaning they're counting everything, right? That they're in the 5th grade doing basic addition and they're still counting on their fingers because they're over-reliant on counting. Why? Because they didn't have the prerequisite skills to move into addition to begin with, so they used what they had, which was counting, which they didn't really understand to begin with. Counting is much, much more complex mathematically than simply just saying the words 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? We're going to get into some of those things as we look at the skill sequence for counting and how we might teach kids about that. The National Research Council has what they call the 5 strands of mathematical proficiency. So it's kind of like that iceberg idea again. When we look at the surface, we see students that are mathematically proficient. But how do we actually define that proficiency? And the National Research Council in 2001 came out with this rope and said math proficiency is actually intertwining 5 different principles. the ability to adapt reasoning, the ability to be strategic in their approach to mathematics. Having a productive disposition is a big one, meaning when you go into a math problem that you accept, look, this is a challenge and I'm going to work on it, but if I work on it, I can learn it, right? That we see a growth mindset in students. And procedural fluency, which we think a lot about in terms of math, having kids actually compute and use procedures to solve problems and things like that. I want to focus in on conceptual understanding because that's really kind of where we're at today. And I would actually break it apart and say there's two different kinds of conceptual understanding that we want to think about. One of those is the conceptual understanding of the math topic. So if you want to teach addition, what is it that you want to teach about addition, and how will you get kids to conceptually understand addition? And we could have whole conversations about how to teach addition, okay? Not really the focus today. If you say you want to teach addition, what I'm going to say is, how do we build conceptual understanding of all the prerequisites that are needed so that we can extend that into teaching addition? Okay? We're really focused on conceptual understanding of those prerequisites. We may have to teach those. They may already be in place. But you don't know whether or not students know those, right, until you assess for those. So we want to give you a way that you can organize what those prerequisites look like that you define, and how you can look to assess those and to organize those, and ultimately to teach anything that you have to teach to make sure that you fill in those gaps. Okay? When we think about conceptual understanding, we're talking about that idea of an extended tact, right? So we need to generalize, and we need that across novel items. So for example, if I'm showing 6, that they don't only know 6 when they see 6 frogs, they know 6 when they see 6 turtles, when they see 6 stars, when they see 6 circles. They need to generalize that quantity of 6 if I'm trying to teach 6. Okay? And that's true for all 5 of those different settings in terms of generalization. And a lot of it is like the feature function class stuff that you've learned. So if you have been into either of those 2 PaTTAN trainings, especially the more advanced one, you get into how to teach things like feature function class. And we're tacting critical features of those items. So when we talk about quantity, for example, we're talking about not tacting a characteristic of one item, but we're talking about tacting the characteristic of the set, right? So there are 6 things in this set, or 5 things in this set. And of course, so this is the thing, right? There's joint control sitting here. So it's not like there's just one thing that's going to control that response for the student. It's going to be the convergence of these things. And a lot of it you're going to be thinking about if you're really into ABA stuff. You're going to be thinking about all the self-echoics that you would want kids to be practicing while they're engaging in those practices. All right, so another piece about conceptual understanding then is this idea of the atomic repertoire, right? Which means new combinations of skills applied to new behaviors. Ultimately, that's what we ask kids to do in mathematics. That's really how language results. You learn words, and now you can piece together those words to fit that situation that you're in, and you have never put those words together before in your life. Here's me trying to work on my atomic repertoire as I use some ABA vocabulary that I'm working to understand better and relate it to mathematics. So when we think about those prerequisite skills, to be able to have an atomic repertoire, we need the imitation, we need the echoic, we need the tacts, not just tacts of simple items, but extended tacts, tacts that work with feature function class. We need textual behavior and transcriptive behavior. Okay? All those things are relevant if we're going to move that student into being able to apply skills they've learned into novel situations. Okay, but if we're going to do that, we have to figure out what those skills are, and then we're going to outline those in a matrix, which I'll show you how we do. Okay? So a little bit about textual behavior before we go forward. Anytime I open up a math textbook, one of the first things I see are digits written there, and kids are asked to engage in those digits and do something with those digits, right? Whether that's extend the count sequence, or write the answer to a problem, or draw that many things, or whatever it is. As soon as they're engaging in that text, they're dealing with textual behavior. And is it important for kids to be able to read mathematics? Absolutely. Absolutely. However, and this is one of the things that I took away when Amiris was training me in the intensive piece, textual behavior is only relevant when students understand the meaning of the words, right? You don't want kids reading a book, being able to say the words in the book. If they don't know what the words mean, there's no sense in them reading that book. That's why we do a lot of vocabulary development as we're building language. The same is true for math. Okay? Math is a language. So it's not just about symbols. It is, But interpreting those symbols is only relevant when kids understand their meaning. So for example, I don't care initially that a kid can look at a problem 2 plus 3 and say 2 plus 3. I don't care about that unless they understand what 2 is, unless they understand what 3 is, unless they understand what addition means. Those are some of the prerequisite skills that need to be there and generalized if you're going to engage kids in that textual behavior, right? Meaning reading and interpreting math problems. And that tends to be a place that we start pretty quick as we start giving kids math problems and they don't know what they're dealing with. And again, that's something that's true for all kids, isn't it? Like I could throw equations up here and teach you how to solve quadratic equations and never define quadratics and try to have you memorize procedures, and the whole time you're going, what is an x squared? What am I doing? Why are we factoring? I don't remember factoring. Ugh, that was like middle school. That was when I freaked out and didn't like math anymore because they did factoring and that was tough, right? So you have to understand those symbols that you're dealing with before you start interpreting and working with those symbols. And a lot of that is going to come through the acquisition of that language. Okay, so that's my best shot at it as I try to make it relevant for people who are more advanced in terms of their ABA understanding. But I'm going to simplify that from this point forward, okay? So I'm not going to go down that path again. And if you have advanced ABA questions, remember, write those down. We'll get you good answers to those, okay? Otherwise, I want to focus on the mathematics, okay? But still connect it to what you know. So just because I'm not necessarily saying the exact vocabulary, if you're sitting there thinking, that's really an adjective, and when we teach that, like we teach adjectives or like we teach prepositions or something like that, that's probably going to be appropriate. So make those notes for yourself. So when we outline instruction, and that's really what we're doing, we start with this idea of conceptual understanding. And so when we do that, we set up a matrix for all the prerequisites, okay? Which means we need to define what those prerequisites are, and then we need to organize them so that we can figure out what kind of operant we're probably using to teach that and how we might go about teaching that, what ways we already have to teach those things, and we can layer on what we already know about good instruction to math content, because it's not necessarily going to change just because we're dealing with mathematics. The other thing that's going to do for you when you set up the matrix is allow you to assess and say, if this is all the stuff that I need kids to know, what do they know? What can they do? What have they generalized? Where are the holes? Where are the weak spots? And how do I shore those things up? The other thing that we do is we think about procedural understanding. And so we use a lot of CRA progressions for this. So if you're not familiar with CRA, and it's not the focus of this training, but it's concrete, representational, abstract, meaning before we have kids deal with abstract symbols and digits, we have them deal with manipulatives. We have them model things. For example, it could be as simple as this. To teach the idea of addition, if I have these two sets of objects, addition is the combining of those sets, versus subtraction as the removal of a subset from a set, right? And so addition would look like the combination, subtraction would look like the removal. Okay? And so that might be one of those progressions that we work through with concrete objects, with pictures where kids can draw those. They can cross them out then to show the removal of those, or they can draw them more to see the addition of those, until we get into that idea of the abstract. And then we start dealing with those symbols. So what happens along the way in that progression is that when kids are concrete, they're not doing everything through the lens of abstract math symbols. What they are doing is working on the language and the thought process that's required in the abstract. But they're doing that with as few abstract symbols as possible when you organize that. Okay? If you want to learn more about CRA, that's something to contact the PaTTAN Autism Initiative about, or check out the PaTTAN training calendars, because we do provide very specific CRA progressions and content throughout the course of the year, and we do that at each of our 3 PaTTAN offices across the state, in the Harrisburg office, in the Pittsburgh office, and in our East office. All right. Am I talking too fast? Okay. All right. The other piece that's important, though, because if we just do the conceptual understanding for prerequisite skills and we just do the progression to help kids with procedural understanding, you're still going to struggle in those procedures if kids don't have that fact fluency. So fact fluency is still something that you're going to work on. For years, what I've seen happen in math, at least the way I picture it, is before, math computation, mental computation was extremely important because nobody was going to have a pencil and paper the whole time. Because if you were in the field working and you needed to compute, if you were at the market selling stuff, you needed to compute, you had to be able to do that mentally. And then all of a sudden people were able to acquire writing instruments and paper and things like that became more accessible. So now we have the ability to write that, so we don't need to estimate. We can get into more formal algorithms. But it's really important to know all your facts because you're still going to have to do that computation by hand and quickly. And like when we came through school, we used to hear the old adage, what are you going to carry a calculator around in your pocket for your whole life? You've heard this? Me too. And then all of a sudden, my first couple years at TG, this little baby pops up, and now everybody really does have a calculator floating around in their pocket. So kind of what happened somewhere along the way was people said, look, everybody gets these procedures, but they have no conceptual understanding of what's going on with mathematics. So they're memorizing processes, but they don't really get why they're doing what they're doing, so they can't access higher level content. Okay? When my grandfather went through school, I bet probably hardly anybody got algebra instruction. Now we have algebra instruction actually happening in kindergarten standards, right? Kids have access to full-blown algebra courses as early as like 5th and 6th grade if they're really pushing content. So it happens a lot quicker and a lot more complex work done mathematically, which requires a conceptual understanding of the early work that's going on. However, what happened then is everyone was like, oh, conceptual understanding, it's all about understanding why. And then what happened is we got a set of kids that roll through that they know why it works, they just can't actually do it, right? Like they could hypothetically land a plane, but don't put them in the cockpit and ask them to do it, and do it safely. Or I've got somebody that can write about surgery, that knows the vocabulary about surgery. They can draw pictures about surgery. They can name all the organs and where to cut and all that. But you give them a scalpel and they can't perform the surgery. The same's kind of true in math. We have some people that have really strong conceptual understanding, but when it comes time to actually do the mathematics, then it's lacking, right? The ability to actually compute isn't there. It's a balance of those things. The procedural understanding and the conceptual understanding both have to be in place to really engage students effectively. Math fact fluency is just as important now as it ever was. And so when you're ready for that, that is something that you're going to need to develop before you get real complex in terms of the procedures that you're dealing with. For example, if you are just doing a 2-digit by 2-digit subtraction problem, you've got a subtraction, well actually you've got to check to see if you can subtract. You might have a borrow, then you're going to subtract. You're going to have to deal with the subtraction when you do borrow, and then you're going to actually have to subtract those after you've borrowed. So just a two-step subtract, or a 2-digit by 2-digit subtraction problem, you're looking at a minimum of like 5 steps in that task analysis, right? And 2 of those are hinged on the ability to actually compute that subtraction problem. One of the things that happens to kids is because the fact fluency isn't there, because there's an over-reliance on one-to-one correspondence, because the conceptual understanding is weak, because the prerequisite skills aren't in place to engage in that content, kids revert back to what they know to be able to get the answer and be correct. Because God love them, they want to be right, don't they? They want to perform for us as educators. So they're doing everything they can. But in the process of doing that, they've eaten up all their working memory, and now they can't attend to larger steps, right? Larger algorithms with more steps in the process. The ability to get kids fluent with their math facts is important, okay? Because what that does is it reduces the amount of working memory that kids need to spend on the actual computation, frees up the working memory to focus on the algorithm or the problem-solving processes that they're supposed to engage in, okay? And then, of course, we connect those, right? And we keep building, and we keep building, and we keep strengthening all of those things. Now, we're not really talking about fact fluency today. Okay, remember I said we're really focused on this matrix and setting up the prerequisite skills that are necessary to move into that procedural work that you're going to ask students to engage in. And ultimately, when you morph all of this together, you're really looking at building conceptual understanding of the target content. Okay? It's still going to lead there. So if you say, I need my kids to understand fractions as numbers, okay, what we're going to say is, okay, how can we build conceptual understanding of dealing with fractions as numbers? What do you need them to do? We need them to locate on a number line. We need them to identify the numerator and denominator. We need them to be able to deal with shapes, all those kinds of things that you come up with. And that's fine over here, but then what are the prerequisites to get them to there so that we outline those prerequisites? And then once we shore those up, we assess, make sure we know where the holes are, we teach where the holes are, we make sure that we've generalized those to the point of conceptual understanding for the prerequisites, then we can start to engage in the procedures that are appropriate for that and utilize those prerequisite skills that we've just built. And as we do all of that in tandem, we're building that conceptual understanding for fractions. Okay? But the initial conceptual understanding is going to be all about those prerequisite skills. So what's the process that we engage in? I'm going to give you a little tip-off to this. I'm going to quiz you like 12 times throughout the day on this, okay? We'll do a little bit of corresponding with it. But the first question is, what's the math procedure? And you're going to have to diagram that procedure. So I'll show you what these look like for some that we've worked on for different students or different ideas that we've worked on. For example, the counting progression, there's an idea of what it looks like. We'll talk more about that when we hit that section of the content. But we need to figure out what are those procedures and, most importantly, what are the prerequisite skills associated with that procedure. Because this is how we want to teach this content, but what's necessary to engage kids in that content, because I got to make sure all that stuff is there first. Then when we look at those prerequisites, we really focus in on those and we build what we're referring to as a concept matrix. I don't know if that's the official term, but for those of you who have worked with Mike or Amiris or the Autism Initiative, they've talked about matrix training and things like that. So that's kind of what Mike put me on at that point and said this is really matrix training. So I'm at least using concept matrix, and you make more connections, we can talk more about that later. So we're going to build that matrix, and this is part of what you're going to engage in today. We're going to teach and assess for all of that matrix. So everything that you put on there that you've deemed to be an important prerequisite skill, you need to make sure that all those things are in place for students. Some of them may already be there before you begin, right? And some of those you might have to build from scratch. Some of them might be partially developed. But this will give you the organization for the background skills. And then we're going to teach those procedures and work towards fluency and generalization. Okay? Whew. That's it. We're done. That was like 35 minutes. Everybody's ready to go do those sequences, right? Okay. That's what we're going to work on today. Okay? We're going to work on going through all of this process for your students so that when you go back into the classroom and you say, okay, here's where my kid's at on the VB map, this is an indication that they've got strong skills, they've got good tact repertoires, right? They know adjectives, they're ready to engage in math instruction. And so if this is the content that I want to teach, what are the prerequisite skills for that? How do I organize the prerequisite skills so that I can make sure that all those things, bless you, are in place? All right. So the first thing, I said I would quiz you, right? So the first thing is to figure out the math procedure. And so we're going to diagram the what, everybody? We're going to diagram, there you go. We're going to diagram those procedures, and that's part of what you're going to see today and part of what you're going to work on. The next thing we're going to do is include a list of something. We're going to include a list of something. We're going to include the list of the prerequisites. And then we're going to move in and look at those prerequisites. So when we think about those prerequisites, the first thing we're going to do is build something. We're going to build a concept matrix. Okay? And then we're going to think about something in that matrix, right? They're going to do two things with that matrix once we build it. We're going to make sure that we do two things. What are we going to do? We're going to and got it. We're going to teach and assess all that matrix. And it might not be teach it, then assess it, right? You're doing both of those things. So you may say, some of this is already in place. Let me do some code probe, right? And assess and see which pieces are still there. And you can rule out some instructional needs. But then when we teach the new things, we still need to make sure that we assess for those as well. And then the last thing is we're going to look at teaching those procedures. So where we started with what's the content we want to target, that's actually the last thing that we're going to do. We're going to build all that stuff under the iceberg before we deal with the top part of that. So when we teach those procedures, we're going to work towards what in all areas? We're going to work towards the fluency. And then the last thing is we're also going to work towards what with these ideas? We're going to work towards the generalization. Are you happy that I gave you the answers first? Okay. We're going to practice that one again and again and again. As we keep going through this, I won't give you the answers anymore. Just a little bit of prompting as we get started. Okay? Questions at this point. This is a good time for me to take a breather and overview of where we're headed today, kind of big picture process before we jump into it. Where are we at? Any issues? Questions? That tells me I've either done a tremendous job explaining all this, or you're going, I'm not asking any questions to this guy because he's just going to keep going off the way he has been. Yes, ma'am. So when we organize the matrix, you're going to see those things that you should be teaching and assessing on. And you're not going to want to stop the practice of those things just because you've assessed it and it's been deemed okay. You're not going to just want to let it go. You're going to want to keep engaging in kids with that. Because if it does go away, you're going to need to bring it back up. You're going to have to reteach it, right? So it's going to take time to really solidify all those skills, okay? So I would say there probably is some level of back and forth movement, but instead of, you don't want, we teach to here and then fall the whole way back and teach to here and fall the whole way back. We should see, we get them forward, they go back a little, we get them forward, they go back a little, but we're continually pushing them forward and they're falling back less and less. If they're always falling apart on the original stuff that you were doing, my concern would be that they didn't, whatever the assessment was that was in place wasn't valid enough that they actually learned that content and they got moved on too quickly from it. Okay? But there will be some back and forth with all students as they learn. Other questions? You good? All right. Nobody tweeted anything bad yet, right? Anybody tweet anything yet? Okay. All right. Well, okay, so let's teach counting, all right? And what we're not going to do is we're not going to take for granted the count, right? I love them. Really helps expose kids to numbers. He tries to do one-to-one correspondence and cardinality, which we'll talk about. But don't take for granted just because a kid has a verbal sequence of being able to say digits, that the names of digits, that he or she understands counting. In fact, there is a whole branch of mathematics referred to as combinatorics, which is a fancy way to say the study of counting, really complex things. So counting doesn't really leave, right? It's one of the earliest things. Addition is more efficient counting than counting everything. And subtraction is more efficient counting than counting everything and then removing it and counting what's left. And multiplication is repeated addition. So instead of doing addition or instead of counting everything, we can use multiplication. Like all the operations really can be tied back to more efficient counting practices. So there's 5 aspects to counting that are important for students. So as we think about how we want to teach counting, these are some of the things that we want to consider. One of those is one-to-one correspondence. And one-to-one correspondence pops right up in your standards, grade level standards, pretty early, like kindergarten and pre-K stuff. And that says that kids are counting one thing at a time and moving it. So for example, if I'm counting these markers, that when I count 1, 2, and 3. Okay, that as I count, I move one thing. My favorite example of one-to-one correspondence was when we played board games. We rolled a 6, and then we took our piece and we went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every time you moved 1, you counted 1 in terms of that board game. And so that's one-to-one correspondence. Why is that important? Because you don't want to have this set and have a student go 1, right, and actually remove 2 items. They say one number for each item. So one-to-one correspondence is one of the important fundamental counting principles. Cardinality is another one. Cardinality refers to the size of the whole set. One-to-one correspondence and cardinality seem to get a lot of attention in terms of standards in math instruction, but it is something that kids struggle with, and I'll give you my concept of why, or my ideas as to why. But cardinality basically means the size of the whole set. So when I count, if I'm counting these again, when I count 1, 2, 3, right, there's my one-to-one correspondence, 1, 2, 3. And then you say, so how many are there? 3. Right? It's understanding the size of that set. Kids that struggle with that, you'll see them go 1, 2, 3 when they have one-to-one correspondence. And then you say, so how many are there? And they go 1, 2, 3. Yeah, but how many in all? 1, 2. No, don't count them. Just tell me how many, right? Because they've got the, sort of as I describe it, they've got the song and they've got the dance, right? But they've got no meaning attributed to those things. Okay? That's one of the reasons we have to make sure the necessary prerequisites are in place. Stable order is another principle, that once you establish the order of 1, 2, 3, it is always 1, then 2, then 3. It will never be 2 and then 1 and then 3. You can't do that. That there is a consistent order in terms of the way that we sequence numbers. Okay, we can count forwards, we can count backwards, we can skip count, but what we're not doing is mixing those things up, right? Like imagine a number line where there wasn't a stable order to the digits that were on a number line. You could put the digits in any spot that you want. All of mathematics would fall apart. Then there's this concept of abstraction. meaning we need to engage kids in counting things with more abstractness as they go. So counting concrete manipulatives, counting pencils, counting markers, counting money, coins, whatever it is. That's important initially, but we have to increase the abstractness. Why is something like that important? If I have these things and I'm counting these markers, and I count 1, 2, 3, and I have one-to-one correspondence, and you say, well, how many are there? And I say 3, so I have cardinality. And then you go, well, how can you be sure? I can recount them, right? This is not very abstract in terms of counting. And I'm going to ask you, count with me on this, okay? Count with me on this. Count my claps. You ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many times did I clap? 4. Prove it. You can try to imitate it back, right? But what you might be doing is going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did he keep clapping? Should I keep clapping? Right? Because a clap, once it happens, is over. There is no way to access that noise again because the noise has left. So that's much more abstract in terms of counting than having physical objects in front of you. Or think about counting sheep in your head. They're not real sheep, right? So if I ask you to count sheep in your head to fall asleep and you've got that old image of the fence and the sheep running and jumping over, if you count 1, 2, 3 sheep and I say, how many sheep did jumped over your fence? And you tell me 3, how can I verify that 3 actually jumped over the fence? You could have mentally been thinking, there go 2 sheep, so that's 1, and there go 2 more sheep, and here's a whole herd, right? And that's 3 sheep, so I counted 3 sheep, even though mentally I wasn't thinking about those sheep, right? I wasn't thinking about 1 sheep at a time. So we want to layer on the level of abstractness, okay? We want to get kids counting more abstract things, not just in terms of the symbols that they deal with, but also in terms of the objects or the things that they're counting that they have to deal with. The last one is order irrelevance. And I don't see a ton of this popping up, but I do see this as something you want to pay attention for, that it doesn't matter what order I count things, I'm still going to arrive at the same conclusion. For example, let's go back to my markers. If I count blue, red, green, I'm going to get 3. If I count red, blue, green, I still get 3, right? That can be important if you have different sets that you're dealing with. Like if you have 2 color counting chips and one side's red and one side's yellow, and you have 3 reds and 4 yellows, and the question is 3 and 4 are going to make what when we combine those sets? If a student doesn't understand that they can count the reds and then the yellows, then the reds, they don't have that concept of commutativity in mathematics, right? So they're seeing 3 plus 4 as different than 4 plus 3. They've lost that, or they haven't gained that. Or they can count a red and a yellow and a red and a yellow and a red and a yellow, or 2 reds and a yellow and 3 reds and 2 more yellows. It doesn't matter the order they count them, right? They're still going to get to the same size set in that group. That's something that you pay attention to. It's not often a problem, but it is something that you want to look for, okay? At least I haven't experienced it a lot as a problem. Mostly what I see problems with are they get one-to-one correspondence, but they get it without meaning established with it, so now they become reliant on it. So when we get to aspects of cardinality and understanding group size, they fall back on one-to-one correspondence without understanding the size of the whole group. And the stable order doesn't even make sense because we've assumed a stable order by helping them parrot back the words 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then they practice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We go, okay, they can count to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now use that and move one item at a time when you do that. And we start taking a verbal sequence and we start layering on the one-to-one correspondence with a verbal sequence, but the kids don't even know that it has to be, or mathematically why it has to be, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So then down the road, when they're left to independent pieces, right, or they're thinking about something, they could be switching numbers up with no understanding of why that's happening. So my argument is one of the first things we want to establish is stable order. And the way that we're going to do that is through cardinality. We're going to teach them size of sets first. Because as you're going to see when we map out the matrix, if I want them to count from 1 to 2 to 3, they dang well better know what 1 means, what 2 means, and what 3 means independently before I start putting those skills together. Right? Because if they just have the words 1, 2, 3, it doesn't mean they know 1, 2, or 3 at all. I can establish the stable order through that concept of cardinality. Then I can get into the one-to-one correspondence. So once kids know, if I show them this without counting, they know this is 3 because I teach them that this is 3. And anytime they see a set of 3, they can recognize a set of 3. then when they count 1, 2, 3, and I say how many in all, they already know 3, right? Cardinality has already been established before the one-to-one correspondence was layered in on top of that, other than having to use one-to-one correspondence to count everything to figure out how many are there. Now, that probably sounds really complex, but it's not as bad as it sounds. You all did this when you were children. When you played a game, you rolled dice, and if you saw dots that looked like this, you would tell me right away it's how many? 4. Even though I've got a really bad representation of what 4 dots look like, you were still able to generalize that, right? So you knew 4 because you learned that that was 4. Nobody proved it to you. You were playing with other kids, and they're like, oh, you wrote a 4. Oh, I wrote a 4, right? And you started to learn that that was 4. You started to subitize what 4 meant right away. Okay? We're going to talk more about subitization as we get there in a little bit. But essentially, it's like rolling a dice and knowing how many are on the dice without ever having to count them. Imagine if somebody taught you to play a board game and said, roll the dice. Now count the dots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now move the piece. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All you would ever practice is one-to-one correspondence. That's not naturally how we learned about quantities with games. We rolled a 5 and we knew it was a 5 because people told us it was a 5, right? So we just were able to tact that quantity, right? Or tact a feature of that set. And once we knew that was 5, then we did the one-to-one correspondence, right, to move our pieces. Or we got more advanced and we'd move 3 to a special spot and then move 2 more, and we started to chunk out those numbers. Okay? So it's more of a natural progression if we think about building cardinality before the one-to-one correspondence. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know that one of these exists before the other so much. I think these two things grow together. But the top 3 represent a category of how we count. We count through the lens of stable order, cardinality, and one-to-one correspondence. That teaches us how to count. When we think about what we count, abstractness and order irrelevance is more about what we're counting than how we're counting those things. Okay? All right, so prerequisite skills. So if I'm teaching counting, the first thing I want to do is I want to brainstorm prerequisite skills. And I might say things like, well, if I want kids to count, they have to be able to say the name, right? Or they have to be able to sign the digit that they're working with. They have to know quantity. Like, I don't want them to count to 3 if they don't know what 3 means. Then what's the point of counting to 3? So they need to understand concepts of quantity. They're going to need to know the words when they see them. Like, if I show them the word 5 and say count to this number, I want them to know, oh, that's 5. So then I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want them to be able to identify symbols and digits. So if I have them count and I say count to this number and I hold up a 7, they need to know that that's a 7 and that that's the same 7 as if I have the word 7 presented in front of them. So that when they can write those symbols and digits, they have all this stuff lined up for them, right? They have all the interplay between all these skills. So just listing those prerequisites kind of makes you go, okay, well, how are we going to teach that, right? Like, because now we're starting to think about how all these things interplay with each other. This is where the idea of this matrix comes in. So in the flow chart, we see all those processes we just talked about over here, right? Cardinality, stable order, one-to-one correspondence being the first 3, then abstraction, order irrelevance. But over here are the prerequisite skills, just listed out a little bit differently. This is a nice way to organize those prerequisite skills. Now, we're assuming some sort of order here just because we were making that assumption with that kid when we were working with that teacher. That they said they wanted to prioritize the speech first. So if they don't have the echoics of say 2 and the kid saying 2, that we're going to have a lot of issues engaging in the rest of it. But this isn't the actual matrix. This is the stuff that we would put into the matrix. So here comes your concept matrix. This is one of the things we'll be working on. We want to think about what's the antecedent and what's the behavior that's exhibited. So what's the teacher do? What's the student do? Okay? And so what I wanted the student do is to be able to find digits, write digits. Notice it's not all the same prerequisites because new stuff has popped up. I want them to be able to find a digit, write the text, say the number, and make a pattern. Those are the things I want that student to be able to do. Right? Now, this doesn't necessarily work for your kid. Remember, this isn't the answer. This is the way we were thinking about instruction for one particular student. Okay? So you would want to think about your prerequisites. What's the teacher going to do? I'm going to say the number. I'm going to show a digit. I'm going to show a text, or I'm going to show a pattern. And those were the 4 ways that we were going to have the teacher elicit these different responses. So when we create the matrix, what we have essentially then is if I say a number, can they find the digit that matches what I say? If I say a number, can they write the digit that matches the number that I said? If I say a number, can they write the text, right? Or can they spell that for what I just said? If I say a number, can they say it back to me? If I say a number, can they make the pattern that would go along with that number? All of those things are going to be important in terms of saying the number. I want all those responses. The same is true when we show a digit. As we work across each one of those, though, if I say a number and that's the answer is to find a digit, or the response is to find a digit, if I say find 6 and they have to go find the digit 6, that's a listener response, right? So you start to see how the verbal operants are sitting right here as we define them. So if I say a number and they write it, that's transcriptive behavior because they have to write that digit. If I say a number and they're going to write the text, it's still transcriptive behavior. If I say a number and they say it back to me, that's an echoic. So why is it important to label those things in there as best that we can? Because once you know that this is an echoic, I say a number, they say a number, and you've organized it this way, the way you teach your echoics is the way you teach this. We don't have to teach you new ways to instruct. We're just giving you an organizational structure that will help you apply how you already know how to teach to math content. If I said a number and students had to make a pattern, that would be a listener response. Now remember, there's a lot of joint control stuff going on here, right? So this might not be the only operant that they engage in, but we've tried to define those as best that we can in terms of maybe the primary one that we would think about controlling that behavior. The other thing that I want to say is, as we map these out today, if you happen to label something wrong, like you call it a tact when it's a listener response or something like that, it's not going to be the end of the world, right? Because we know that a lot of these things are actually taught in the same types of procedures. Okay? So when we show a digit, it would be like find a digit would be matched to sample. We've got the transcriptive behavior again. Here's an intraverbal, and here's a match to sample. So a couple other pieces we're dealing with. So when I show the text and they say the number, that would be a textual response because they're interpreting the text that they've been given. One of the things I questioned was, what about when I show a digit? To me, a digit is a symbol that represents something, just like letters are symbols that represent something. So when I show a digit and they say, you know, I showed the digit 5 and they say 5, isn't that transcriptive or textual behavior because they're interpreting not text but digits, right? That was one of the ones that I was confused about when we were working through this. And I'm talking with Willow and he's going, well, if you go back to the original analysis and like Skinner and how they did all this work, he actually defined it more precisely and said, you don't include digits in that. I had no way of knowing that, right? Probably wouldn't change how I would instruct it very much. You still get the point of how to instruct, okay? So it's not important that you have the exact perfect operant in each box, but that you get the idea of this is primarily how you're trying to deal with whatever the antecedent is and whatever the behavior is, or whatever the teacher does and what the expectation is from the student. And every once in a while, you're going to run into something that you just go, this is kind of dumb. Like, why would I ever want to engage in this particular thing? For example, when would I really maybe want to show a kid the word 7 and say, make 7 things? That might not be something that you need to deal with. So if you ever run into a pairing that you go, I'm not sure that that pairing is something that I actually need to teach, just don't include it in your matrix. Okay? You just get rid of that box, exit out, scribble over it, whatever. Because every once in a while there's like an oddball thing and you go, kids never really have to deal with that. So don't force the instruction on it, okay? We do have a break coming up in like 15 minutes, just so you know. So here's our quiz again. Okay, so the first thing we're going to think about is what's the process. And when we think about the process, we're going to diagram something. What are we going to diagram, everyone? We're going to diagram the procedures. Diagram the what, everybody? Diagram the procedures. Okay, and then we're going to include a list of something. This is really where we're spending the majority of our time. Once we get the procedures down, that's going to cue us into what are these things that we need to list out. These things that we need to list out are the what, everybody? It's the prerequisites. Absolutely. It's the prerequisites. And once we deal with what those prerequisites are, we're going to build something using those prerequisites that we just looked at it. We're going to build the what, everybody? We're going to build the... And there's going to be 2 things that we do with that matrix. We're going to do 2 things. The first thing, well, one thing that we're going to do, and I'll tell you it starts with a T. So the one thing that we're going to do is we're going to teach. And the second thing we're going to do is we are going to Do you have to do them in that order? The answer is no, because there may be some things in there that you can assess for right up front that you think the student already has in place. Okay? Or some things that they pick up so quickly that they've generalized not old skills, but previous skills into this new situation that you don't necessarily maybe have to teach the echoic piece because they do that naturally now, right? Because they've got a good echoic repertoire. All right, and then we're going to teach the procedures, and we're going to work towards something in all areas. We're going to work towards the fluency in all areas. And we're also going to work towards what? Thinking about conceptual understanding and extended tax and things like that. We're going to work towards, starts with a G, we're going to work towards generalization, okay? And that takes some time to do that in different areas, but we have to work towards generalization. We want them to have conceptual understanding. They can't have an understanding of 7 only when I'm dealing with circles. And I throw triangles in that, like triangle, right? And 3 sides, and they're naming everything, and it's red, and it's black, and it's, and it's open, and it's filled in, and they're naming all kinds of things because they don't understand 3 across those different items, okay? Questions? Getting closer to break. I ran you through that one. Okay? We're going to work on building one together, too. Good? Whoop. Okay. So, what about early computation? Pop quiz again. Told you we were going to do this a lot, right? Because I want you to walk out of here. I don't care if you remember the math content, because this isn't really a math content training. I want you to walk out of here saying, this was the process that he engaged us in. So when I do sit down with math content, if you don't have the content, you can pull other teachers from your building to say, help me think through this. But you know the process to think through it, so that you can start to design an instructional sequence appropriate for your students. So the first thing, we diagram the what, everybody? We diagram the, and then we include a list of, and then once we know what those prerequisites are, we're going to build a, and we're going to make sure that we do 2 things. We're going to, and that matrix. And then when we're sure that that conceptual understanding has been built with the matrix, we're going to actually get into the procedures that we started with by mapping out. And we're going to work towards fluency in all areas. And we're going to work towards generalization. Okay? All right. How do you like this flow chart? This is mine, okay? And it's crazy complicated. Let's just be honest. It came from a teacher that we were working with that said they wanted their student to engage in computation, right? And so we said, what do you want them to compute? I want them to be able to do all of it. Like, I need to get them up to whole number algorithms. And we went, okay, here's whole number algorithms. How are we going to get them there? And so we started talking about and piecing out what's the process that we would work through. This is the flow chart piece. Okay? It's a little complex because she had a big goal with a lot of background skills that needed in place. It would have been much easier to build a flow chart if she said, I just want to work within sums less than 5. We could have said, okay, then let's build a flow chart just for sums less than 5. She didn't pick an easy piece of content, right? She went real far down the line and said, I want whole number algorithms. How am I going to get there? Okay, so what we said was, well, let's start with sums less than 5. And if we start with all sums less than 5, so we're going to do 2 plus 1, right? 3 plus 1. We wouldn't do 4 plus 1 because that's not less than 5. We do everything less than 5. We keep the digits small first. When we're dealing with that, what are the prerequisite skills needed to deal with that? And then we can engage in that content. As we move here with sums equal to 5, what are new prerequisite skills? Because if you've got already the prerequisite skills for this, a lot of those transfer over, don't they? So there's less prerequisites at this point. So what are the new prerequisites that you need to make sure that are in place so that you can deal with sums that equal 5? And then we thought it was important to deal with 5 plus what equals something. So 5 plus what equals 7? We said were facts that we wanted to prioritize. Why would we want to deal with that? Because we wanted to focus on making a 5 strategy with students so that we don't have to work with fact fluency through the lens of simply memorizing all of our facts. But if I give them 4 plus 4, I don't have to know 4 plus 4. What I have to know is that if I take 1 from the second 4 and give it to the first 4, that's going to be the same as 5 and 3. Right? And now you're kind of hinting on algebra content, aren't you? For free. because I'm going to teach 5 or I'm going to teach the ideas of 4 and 4, and they're going to understand those quantities. They're going to understand the concept of addition as putting together and combining sets differently. That I can show why I don't need to teach 4 plus 4. I need to teach that one of those I can make 5. Then I can focus just on my 5 plus facts and teach those towards fluency. So instead of memorizing 4 plus 4, I teach the concept of making a 5, that 4 plus 4 would be the equivalent to 5 plus 3, and now they have memorized the 5 plus 3, 5 plus 2, 5 plus 1, 5 plus 0, up to 5 plus 5. Those are the facts then that they can memorize. And those are going to lead into that making a 5 strategy. And once I have that in place, I'm going to lead into that making a 10 strategy. And it's going to be those same kinds of skills, except instead of making 5, it's going to be something like 9 plus 7. We don't have to necessarily make kids fluent with 9 plus 7, but what we would have to do is use a making a 10 kind of strategy. Say, well, 9 plus 7, if I took 1 off the 7 and gave it to the 9, that would be 10. So 9 and 7 is the same as 10 and 6. Once they can make that, they just have to know what 10 plus 6 is, right? So in terms of acquiring automaticity with math facts, this kind of structure reduced the need for how much kids needed to memorize when it was appropriate to do that, and gave conceptual understanding to how they were dealing with that computation. I'm not saying that's the way you're going to teach absolutely every kid that you support. Okay? I'm saying that that's what we worked through with one teacher when we were designing a process. Now again, she picked a lofty goal, huh? Like you can see, like this could be a whole year's worth of instruction to finally get down here. Now this student happened to have a lot of prerequisite skills in place as we started to look at those. You're going to see some of that in action. But a lot of those prerequisite skills are already things that we talked about, right? Like saying a number, knowing the digits, knowing quantities, being able to build things. Because if they can't build sets, they can't work with concrete manipulatives. So we need them to be able to do that quick. And they can't build a set if they can't subitize a quantity. So we need them to be able to know that quantity. Okay? So when you think about that, I kind of already labeled this a little bit. And we were supposed to take a break at 10:15, right? You think they'll be upset if we do it a couple minutes earlier? Okay, just as long as we're not at 10:30. So what I want you to do, we're going to take a break a little bit early, just because I think this is going to be a good stopping point for you. I want you to think about what are these kinds of prerequisites, and maybe I've said some of them already, but what would be prerequisites either up here or in here, thinking about place value, thinking about whole numbers? What kind of prerequisite skills would you start to associate with any one of those pieces, okay? When we come back together in 15 minutes, so 20 after 10, 20, let's make it 22 after 10 to be fair for your 15 minutes. When we come back together at like 22 after, we're going to take a look at what some of those prerequisites might be as you brainstorm them, okay? This is the part that we'll work on together, okay? We'll be back together at 22 after. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's come back together. And I'm going to ask you, of all of this, I kind of threw it out at the beginning, like take a look somewhere, think about what the prerequisites are. But what I want to do specifically is I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. You can talk with the person beside you if you want. Think about just place value concepts. Just place value concepts, okay? If you were dealing with, not even in the lens maybe of computation, but if you were just dealing with place value concepts, what are the prerequisites that you would see in the kids needing in order to deal with the concept of place value? What kind of prerequisites would need to be in place? So what I would ask you to do is in about 2 minutes, brainstorm that, jot notes down for yourself, because what we're going to do is we're going to collect those as a group up front, okay? I'll give you about 2 minutes.
Jared, what's place value concepts? We're speech therapists.
6 10s, 7 1s for like 67. Yeah, what is 67 or what is 23? When I add them, I add the 10s, I add the 1s, that kind of stuff. What numbers in the hundreds place? jot those things down. Please share those, okay? Your goal is to get like 1 or 2 concepts down.
No, like that. Oh, okay. Yeah. I was seeing familiar faces in the crowd, but I don't know where they come from anymore. Yeah, I started there the first year they opened the building. Yeah. Yeah. Still working on that. Excuse me, I'm sorry. After they do, okay, because I don't think something to think about. I was thinking, it's the only first they need to do different place because doesn't mean it's still can hold off until you get to the time.
We are. Oh, come on. Do you know where you're at? We are. This side. We are.
We are. Penn State. We are. Penn State.
All right. Whew. I hope the cameras didn't send that first part out. Okay, you don't have to have an entire list. We're not trying to build something that's perfect right now, okay? We're trying to start to engage in this process. So what we've done is I've kind of laid out for you what this teacher had mapped out, but just wanted you to focus just on place value concepts for right now. So if we wanted to think about the prerequisite skills for place value concepts, we'll want to capture those, try to organize those in a matrix, and then we'll look at what are the operants that would be associated with each one of those prerequisite skills. Because if we can do that, you already know how to teach it, right? We're just giving you the what, helping you organize the what, and layering it on top of what you already know about instruction, okay? This is that intermediary phase. So that after we work through this and we practice together, and again, we're not going to have everything perfect. I'm telling you right now, if you claim that it's attacked and I don't know that it's a listener response, I'm probably not going to be the person that argues with you about which operant it is. We'll accept the group's response and we'll leave it up for the time being, okay? After we work through this, then we'll transition into smaller teams and you'll have more of an opportunity to go through the entire process yourself. And what we'll do is we'll take time to break and share and gallery walk and start to look at people's ideas and give feedback on those ideas. And the hope is that we have some flow charts and concept matrices pretty much built by the time you walk out of here, and you can snap some pictures of them, and this is the catalyst to kind of get you moving on this process, okay? And then what we'll do is we'll collect all those, and we'll start to look at is there anything we would maybe add to that? Is there something we might reorganize with it so we can try to get more developed and use the expertise from the field? Cool? Okay, so this is the intermediary step then when we're thinking about place value concepts and what are those prerequisites. So I'm going to type and I'm going to do the best that I can with I have a speech impediment with my fingers, so they don't always work. Prerequisite skills for place value concepts. Did anybody come up with one that they want to share up front? Yes, ma'am.
We said that understanding what place value actually means, so like understanding what it means when the number's in the hundredths place or in the tenths place.
So, Let's have them. I don't know if I want to say touch, but how about identify the position? So like, where's the hundreds place? What else did we hear in that besides identifying the hundreds place? Maybe locate a specific digit. So what place is the 6 in? Would be different than just touch the hundreds place. What other prerequisites are we thinking about? What's that?
Attacking the position.
It might be. We just haven't organized them yet.
You also said regrouping.
I like where you're going. We just might not have time for you. You don't want to take me into that conversation. I'll talk all day about regrouping. I'm going to call it equality. And when I say equality, what I'm going to talk about through the lens of equality is what she said with this idea of regrouping, or borrowing for that matter. That it's really the same thing, just two different directions. That 10 ones are equivalent to 110, and 110 is equivalent to 10 ones. 10 hundreds make 10 tens make 100. 100 is the same as 10 tens. And so we'll talk about that aspect of equality within place value concepts. So I'm going to kind of leave it generic right now and say equality. But you may actually, as you think about that, you might be saying that should really be pieced out and we should be dealing with each one of those individually. And then that's how you would inform your matrix, right? What else were we seeing? This is an interesting one. So 0 actually, in terms of mathematics history, is kind of a controversial topic. Who knew? There was a philosophy that if there's nothing to count, you're not counting. Why would you ever label it? There's nothing to label, right? There's nothing there. So who cares about it? And then there was approaches that says, well, hypothetically, there's something there. What's that something? Nothing. Doesn't make sense because we live in a physical, tangible world, right? So in terms of making sense out of things mathematically, 0 is a very, very abstract concept. And so thinking about 0 as it relates to place value may absolutely be something that you want to work on. What I will say is if you do a lot of place value block work with those concrete materials, the interpretation of 0 is a little bit easier because once they understand 0 is nothing, right? Or is not having any in that set. Then when you ask how many tens and they say 0 tens, you go, well, build that. Done. Right? That should be the easiest one for them to ever build because they don't build anything. But that is something that would have to be worked on and addressed specifically because that's kind of counterintuitive. We say build 0. And for the student that just hears build this, right? Then their immediate reaction is, I got to start moving something because I got to build this, versus I can't build it, there's nothing there. So we would want to address 0. I like that. Any other things? Anything else?
Comparing numbers, like knowing which is bigger, which is smaller.
Yes, ma'am.
Being able to group numbers in sets.
Grade level standards by grade 1 start to say, use place value concepts too, right? 4 little words. Use place value concepts. There's a lot in those 4 little words, aren't there? So when we're thinking about that iceberg, place value understanding might be that top layer, what you see kids doing, but there is a ton of prerequisites. Now, we're not going to go through and try to list absolutely every prerequisite, until we get a perfect list. But what we'll do then is we'll take these prerequisites, and instead of just listing the prerequisites, I want you to make sure that you have an image of this. And I'll move back and forth. But if you don't have some of these jotted down, this might be a good time to jot them down. I'll put them up here. Because I want you thinking about, with these types of prerequisites, what would the teacher do and what would the student do that would illustrate that? Okay? And it's collective list. So it's not like one-to-one for each one. So when we talk about locating a digit might be the teacher says the position and the student finds the number in that position, or the teacher says the position and the student writes a number in that position, or however you would want to organize that. Okay? You got an image of those? You got some of those captured? So the next piece then is, what's the teacher going to do and what's the student going to do? And I want to give you about 2 minutes, and take a little opportunity and talk with your partner again and think, what are the things that you would expect students to do based on this list? Okay? And some of it might be verbatim, but you might have expectations that they do this, and it works across a couple of those, and that's okay. All right? Does that make sense? It's not easy, right? That's why it's like this problem-solving process. It's not nice, neat, and clean cut. We just have to think through, what is the expectation of the student so that they can engage in place value? What would we have to have in place for them? And so we've thought about some of these prerequisite skills. So we talk about understand 0, but what do we want them to do with that? How are they going to understand 0? What would I ask? And maybe 0's not as critical as we originally thought when we build the matrix. Maybe 0's embedded into other things when we build that matrix. But it's important for us to think about right now. Okay? So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. And I'll probably give you 5 minutes, to be fair. I'll give you about 5 minutes. I want you not just listing prerequisite math skills and ideas. I want you thinking about, what would the teacher do? What would the student do? How would you map those things out? Okay? You don't have to build the map. We're going to do that together. But just kind of get a list for yourself. If I want them to know this stuff, what is the expectation? What might I ask and what might they do? Okay? And then we'll come back together. We are. We are. All right. I'm on, right? I think I'm on. I can't see it. Am I on? Yeah. Okay. Not easy, right? Not easy. In fact, I'll tell you as a presenter, it scares me to death to say, we're going to build this and we're going to do it in 10 minutes so you get the idea, because it's not, we're going to have to piece together all of our ideas and think through that. Okay? Because this is a novel situation. But that's what the work looks like, doesn't it, when we teach kids? We run into these novel situations, and we have to problem solve, and we have to think through about how we might show this. And remember, the goal isn't to have you simply just put the right operand in the right box, right? That's certainly part of it, to think about the kind of instruction, but there's other supports out there for that. The main piece is to think about how we organize these prerequisite skills and think about the instruction that's needed prior to jumping into whatever the instruction is that we want to focus on at hand, to make sure that those prerequisite skills are in place, and if they're not, that we can address the needs of the student there before we move forward, okay? So we came up with some of these examples of what might be prerequisite skills, and we said that we would list them out on a slide. So let me ask, and I saw people actually starting to flesh out a matrix, which was interesting. Anybody come up with an example of a student behavior that they think should be included? What would you expect students to do? Okay. And what else?
I don't know if this is right, but we said like converting like between expanded form and word form. So like I guess like converting forms. I don't know if that would be like the behavior.
Hold that one. Okay. Hold that one with expanded form. Because we might find that that actually happens through other things. Kind of like 0, but I'm not sure yet.
Match example?
But what? Like what's the...
Well, we were talking about matching to sample and expanded with expanded. Like you we broke down each of those skills. Because each of those skill sets. Can I follow up with a question? We could fill that whole matrix in with skill repertoires for just locating numbers.
You probably could. So we're trying to think just in regard to place value. We're not like, so this is part of the issue, right? What are the prerequisite skills that are in place? So if I jump back to here, remember I said a lot of the prerequisite skills that have to do with sums less than 5, some of them are going to carry over and there's going to be some new additions. You could say, well, if kids need to engage in place value concepts, they need to be able to say the number. They need to be able to write the number. They need to, and you could go that far back. We don't want to do that because the assumption here would be, look, if they're not doing that, you're not teaching place value at that point, right? You're teaching basic concept of number. So what I want to try to key us in on is what are some of the most essential skills just for understanding place value. And locating a number, I think, would be important. And let's say that they would do that given the position. So if we gave them the position of hundreds, that they could locate the number in the hundreds, what else would we want them to do if we gave them a position? We want them to ID the value. We want them to write a number in. Okay, I'm going to leave it with model. And I'm going to stop there. Because I'm hearing other ones that I like too, like expanded form. We want them to write the value of it. So if I say how many hundreds, that the student could write 600, right? And not just in word form, but also 600. They're just doing that piece of expanded form where they could write the value. We could potentially keep going across, right? But we'd just be making the matrix bigger and bigger and bigger. So I don't want to do a massive thing right now. I just kind of want to keep us low key in terms of how many things we're looking at so that we can generalize this idea, okay? What else would we want them as a teacher? What would you do where you'd want them to give you the value or do the model besides giving a position? So if you give them the number, so if I gave them a number, I would want them to locate that number. Fair enough? 216, where's 6? Not what digit's in the ones place, just where's 6? If I gave them the number, they could ID the value. So what's the value of, if it's 74, what's the value of 7? And then the language there would be 7 tens. If I gave them the number, that they would write the number. Here's what I'm going to say, probably don't need that one. Maybe not. Okay, because probably by that point, if you said like 6, write 6, or you might be thinking not just number like single digit. Let's think whole number, like 275, and they write 275. So now that I say it that way, let's take that X off of there. Maybe we do need that one. See what I mean? We're just going to build it as we go. Given the number, write it in word form. Okay, or deal with word form. I'm not going to say write it in word form. Maybe that is. Let's start putting some operants in here. If I gave them a number and they had to find that in word form, that is probably, I'm guessing, match to sample. Yeah? Okay, I'm liking the head nods. If I gave them a number and they had to write it. Transcriptive? Because they're writing it? What if I gave them the number and they had to say the value? So 267, what value is 7? Well, okay. So let's say, so what I'm hearing is in this case we would say the number as a prompt. In this case we would show them a number. So it's already done for them. Okay. So if we showed them a number and we asked them the value, that would be a what? Okay. What if we said the number and they said the value? What if we said the number and they located? Okay, hold on. Everybody pause. We are. I don't want to take us into a verbal behavior piece too much, right? Because remember, the main goal is not that you have the exact operand in there. Not right now. That might be something you want to engage in later. That would be a great thing to do in conjunction with PaTTAN's Autism initiative and do that kind of work. Absolutely. I don't want to take us there because our primary goal is to think about what's the teacher behavior that controls the student behavior. So what's the teacher doing, what's the student response, and how might we think about that, okay? So and I'm even wondering, like if I say the number, if I said, if they had 267 and I say like, what's the value of 6, that they could say that's 6 tens, right? I'm not so concerned whether that's a tact or a listener response that you know that that's one of those things that you want to teach them, okay? Yes, so they're telling me the value of 6. What if we set a number and they gave the location of that number? So here's your number, let's say 700, and I said, where's the 7? And they said hundreds place. What would that be? So they're labeling the position. They're labeling that position. And you might argue it might be a different operand. I don't want to get into that, okay? Where you can have those conversations in that small group when you're doing that other matrix. Let's do one more. If I give them the position, and they have to ID the value, and I said, what's the value of the number in the tens place? And they said 6 tens. What would that be?
Telling you the value of that position. Yes.
You're going to think that's a tact?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to go with that for now. Again, you might remember part of the other thing too, joint control. There's going to be a lot of pieces coming together at this stage. So we're just thinking primarily right now, what's the operant we're thinking about? Because I might teach it a little bit differently depending on which operant it is. But a lot of these are taught in very similar manners. What if I gave them a position and asked them to write the number? So I said, write the number in the tens place. What would that be? Listener response. Okay. What if, given the position, write the word form? So I might have 16, and I would say, write the value of the hundreds, and I would expect them to write out in words 110. If I gave them the number 16, and the question is given the position, so I would say, what's the tens? I would want them to write 110 in words. Let me throw an X in there. Okay? Not that it belongs there, but let's think about it with an X in there. Because you might say, I'm never going to ask them to writing it out in word form is maybe not a priority. So maybe the language that's associated with that is more the priority. And so you want more of the verbal responses than the written responses. Then you adjust your matrix for that. So while you might want to you might want word form to be relevant down here when we say, given expanded form, that they can match that to the word form. Maybe that match to sample would be important, but maybe it's not important when we say a number, right? Or we give a position. And so you'd put an X in there for that aspect. Okay? It's not a clean process. It's nice to have PD where people stand up and say, hey guys, here's the answer. Right? But you know when you look at in-class consultation and you look at the specific needs of students that it gets very, very focused on what is it that's going on with this student? What do we need them to engage in? So the big takeaway from this that we're looking at is not the argument of which operand goes where right now. We didn't even complete the whole matrix at this point, but at least we got the ball rolling that we said. If we want kids to engage in place value concepts, the types of things that we would want to make sure that are in place are, but when we think about place value concepts for addition, subtraction, the prerequisite skills for that are things like given a position that they can develop a model for that. So when I tell them model 6 tens that they can pull 6 rods of 10 out. Why would that be important? So when I give them 26 plus 13, they can model 2 10s, 6 1s, 1 10, 3 1s, and then they can start adding their 1s together and their 10s together. If they can't model that with manipulatives, how are you going to engage them in a concrete modeling process? So that was something that you guys highlighted, that they'd be able to model it given a position. Or if I said the number, right? Model 600s, model 27, right? You could ask different questions specific to value or the whole number. Model 125, right? Make me 125. And it could look like that at some point where they can put all those pieces together. Or when we show them a number, we're thinking about the model aspect, so build this number. And I show them 213. Because ultimately, if you want them to work on, let's just say, a worksheet. I know that's sometimes a bad word in math. But say they are given a worksheet, they're going to have to look at a number and engage with that, those symbols, right? So they're going to have to look at that number and be able to draw a model or be able to start an algorithm or be able to apply language to that. And so those are the kinds of prerequisite skills that you guys are starting to organize up here. Not every matrix is a 5 by 5. That's just what I threw up here so we'd have a template to start typing on. Okay? There we go. You only build really a matrix for yourself as far down as what are the teacher behaviors, right? And as far across as what are the student behaviors. And the biggest piece of advice I will give you is if you start going way, way back, you're at wrong content. So for example, whoop, too far. Here we go. Big nasty flowchart, right? But even if we looked here and the teacher said, I want whole number algorithms, and I said, okay, then you need place value concepts. You're going, okay, so then what are the prerequisites for place value concepts so that we can use that language and that modeling to teach the whole number algorithm? She says, well, I'm going to have the kid to be able to write a 1. They can't write. Now, that's different if it's a physical thing, right? And so maybe there's some verbal ways they can engage it or something like that. But let's say the kid can use a pencil but can't write a digit. I'm going to have to teach them to say 5 when they see the number 5. If they're doing that, they're not ready for place value concepts, right? So as you start to get to higher level content, there are going to be some things that you say, yeah, the kid needs it, but it's not necessarily a prerequisite for this. It would be more of a general prerequisite that hopefully would have been built before now, right? Does that make sense? Because otherwise what happens is I say, hey, let's think about fractions, and you're going back to kindergarten level kind of prerequisite skills and saying, well, I need them to say 1 when I say 1. If that's where you're at, you have no business dealing with fractions at that point, right? Because that'd be way too complex, be way too many prerequisite skills. You got to build a whole bunch of other things before you would get to the fractions component. So when we think about prerequisite skills and how we would label those, we think about what are the things that we want kids to do, just the ideas, and you get started there. That helps generate a list of the types of things we want kids to do. Then we try to get a little bit more specific and say, okay, given this list, we want to think, what's the teacher going to do and what's the student going to do, and how does that make sense in terms of the list? So when I say a number, I need them to do things like locate that number, or ID the value of that individual number, or write a number, or compare it to word form when I say it, or be able to model that with place value blocks. Okay? Because that's the instruction that's appropriate, as you guys have deemed it appropriate, for this student. What I can say is if you're not using place value blocks, you probably don't need the modeling column in there. You probably get rid of that one, and there might be something else that's in there. Or there might be something else that's important for your student that you would want to include an additional column. There might be a different behavior from the teacher, a different antecedent behavior that you want at the beginning that we just didn't talk about right now. Okay? Give me a thumbs up if you're feeling okay. Give me a thumbs down if you're like, dude, we're lost. Thumbs up if you're okay. Thumbs down if it's like, this guy's bonkers. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up, so I'm going to move on from it, okay? It's a problem-solving process. What I do want to do is I want to show you some of the things that we had worked on, and this was just, we were just playing at this point, trying to figure out if we build that flow chart, and this was a teacher that built the flow chart with us, if we built that and we started thinking about prerequisite skills, how might we assess some of those prerequisite skills? So remember we talked about sums less than 5. Do you see the card that's over here? Okay, so it's 3 plus 1. So right now it sums less than 5. What was important to that teacher? A 10 frame. So the model for her would have been on a 10 frame. Doesn't mean that you have to model that way. Can the kid work with digits? Yeah, because he's got digits laying in front of him, right? So if he didn't have that 3 plus 1 there, why would she put that down if he couldn't deal with 3 and 1? So he has some behaviors and some skills already set up before she's jumped into this. So when we thought about prerequisite skills, I'd say things like, what does he know about math? He goes, well, he knows his numbers. He can model individual numbers. He knows sets. We don't need to include those, right? Because she already accounted for the assessment of those in terms of those ideas. And I just want to show you him working with a couple of these ideas.
Can you read the problem? 3 plus 1.
Did we ever ask kids to read anything? Just something to think about.
Good. What number? 3. Make 3 in your hand.
I heard the start of it, so I clicked it, but
Okay, build it.
if you're ever unsure, just read it. Everybody, what is it?
Read that part of the problem. Plus 1. Okay, put 1 in your hand. Add it.
Everybody touch your ears.
How many altogether? 4. Okay, 3 plus 1 equals 4. Read.
Cool? She task analyzed it. Now, we were playing around again, right? So if he faltered on one of those, one of the things that he actually faltered on, and she didn't need to teach anything different. She didn't have to teach other stuff. We just had to change instruction. Was when he had numbers like 1 plus 3, he would only put on enough to get to 3. Right? Instead of actually putting 3 on. So when the bottom number was larger when he was putting chips down, he'd stop when he got to that number instead of putting that all down. So what we said is we need to draw his attention to that. Let's have him put them in his hand before he puts them down. Cleaned up that individual problem. Okay? And so that's what part of that looks like. I'm going to show you one more piece, and then I'm going to... Yes? Okay.
Okay, can you read the problem?
2 plus 4.
Good. What number?
2.
Can you make 2? Or build.
Didn't even need the prompt to hand anymore, right?
Good.
So
What's the
I'm
next
going
part?
then down.
Plus 4.
Can you add 4 to your hand?
More chips this time.
How many more do you need to make 5?
3.
How did he figure that out? How did he know he needed 3 more to make 5? Because he was using the 10 frame. He was using that visual and looking at these empty spots. Okay, so as we started to look, what we were looking for, and this is actually like assessment stuff, what we were looking for was what does he have and what are some of those missing pieces that we're going to have to teach more. Because as this teacher started to think about that matrix, she was saying, I need them to model on a 10 frame, but I don't know, like, what does he know about a 10 frame? And so we started working on like teaching some things and seeing where those gaps were. Okay? And
3.
Say who dough. Say who so.
How many more do you have? How many more do you have to add?
1.
Add 1. So 5 plus 1 equals how many?
6.
So 2 plus 4 equals
6. 6.
now, not the end behavior, right? But that was starting to pair up why 1 and 5 is the same as 2 and 4. Because if you take 1 from the, in this case, if you took 3 from the 4 and added to the 2, you could get a 5. So we weren't thinking about commutativity. We were just thinking take the first one and make it a 5 at that point. Okay? So not the whole matrix, right? But this is what part of the assessment looks like to help understand which pieces the student was able to do. And then as we came across things that he wasn't able to do, then we knew we needed to target that aspect of the matrix to be able to build those prerequisite skills before we really started instructing on this. If he didn't have any 10 frame knowledge, let me tell you, we wouldn't even been doing this assessment, right? Because the teacher already said, I've already been doing stuff with 10 frames, and I know this is a model that he's pretty solid with, so let's see how he can apply that to addition and subtraction. Ma'am. This isn't a public school. Yes. Yeah. Oh, let me pause you for 1 second. I didn't repeat the question. So the question was, how would you deal with this in a public school? And the response was that this was a public school setting where this was filmed in. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. This was not a classroom with 24 kids. This was a specific autistic support classroom where there were kids that are in there, some of them all day, some of them part of the day, some of them are in and out for core instruction for different aspects of the day. So everything was different for different kids.
Okay, because my son is high functioning, autism, and he's in a public school, and when he doesn't want to do the work, he just lays his head down, and they don't.
Is he in high school?
No, he's 6.
Okay. He sounds like my high school students. He sounds like my high school students. When he doesn't want to do the work, he puts his head down. I'm gonna address that with you as soon as I get the whole group going, okay? Because I have some ideas. Okay? I just wanted to make sure that we connect this, because a lot of times it's like it's nice to talk about theory, but how do you start to see that in action? What does that start to look like with students? So I just wanted to give you some examples of what some of that particular work looked like. I already checked in, and you guys gave me the thumbs up, so we're going to keep working, okay? And I'm going to get you going with this process. So remember, we want to review. The first thing is to look at the math procedure that we want, right? And so when we look at the procedure, we have to diagram the what, everybody? We diagram the... All right. Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? Because the answer's there. And then here's the big piece of what we really focus on. We think about the procedures, like what is it that we want the kid to engage in? Make a list of those. If you don't get all flowcharty with it, that's okay. All right? But make a list of those procedures, because those are the procedures that are going to help you understand what the what are, that we have to make a list of. The prerequisites. So you start making a list of those. Then when we start thinking about those prerequisites, it's really, instead of getting it too technical with it, just think, what's the teacher going to do? What's the student going to do, right? What are the expectations during instruction? What do I need the student to be able to do? And how am I going to prompt that kind of response? And so to do that, to help us understand that, we're going to build something. We're going to build a what, everybody? We're going to build a concept matrix. And then this is the last piece, right? Once you get that matrix in place, you would have to do two things. The first thing you would do is and And I shouldn't have said first because they're not technically in that order. There was assessment going on there, right, through a little bit of instruction to see what kind of strength in terms of the prerequisite skills were going on with that student. Okay? But in general, you will make sure that you assess and teach, and probably it's assess, teach, reassess, teach, assess, teach, and back and forth and back and forth. When you shore up the conceptual understanding of those prerequisite skills, which means you've generalized those, right? So if you give it a number on a card and ask how many tens, that the student's okay, but when they open a math book and you say how many tens, now it's like something totally new to them, right? They should be able to see any number on the tens. There's a little thing that I've been playing with, so I'll just throw it out. Think about natural environment training too. One student, we were working on place value concepts and like greater than, less than, so we're walking down the hall and we're just picking stuff off lockers because there's numbers on all those lockers. And I'd say, what locker number is this, 112? How many in the ones, 2? What locker number? And we're just walking down the hallway to like art class and we're just trying to, is that really natural environment? Like who walks around doing that, right? But at least it was a way to continue to engage to a novel type of setting where these numbers weren't just in a math book or weren't just on a card that we were using, okay? So in general, we work towards what in all areas? We work towards what, everybody? And we also work towards... All right, okay, so that's the process that we're going to look through. So here's the last 45 minutes of our time together. Here's the process that we're going to engage you in. You're going to break out, and I'm going to bring you back, and you're going to break out, and I'm going to bring you back. So the transitions will be important so that we can move, and I'll leave this up. You're going to think about in your teams, how do you outline those procedures, right? Like what are the procedures that we would want in play for this particular idea? Then you're going to develop a list of prerequisites for that, and you're just fleshing them out. I'm going to stop everybody at a certain time and say, okay, here's what I want you to do. We're just going to real quickly bounce around the room. Tell us what you're teaching and tell us kind of how you're teaching that. Like these are the things that we're focused on content-wise, and these are the prerequisites so that everybody else in the room has a chance to first hear what you've come up with and might say, what about that prerequisite? Just in case there's one that maybe you hadn't thought about, okay? Again, we're not trying to build the perfect chart. We're trying to just engage in that process at this point. So we'll do that collectively. Then you'll have an opportunity to continue refining that work, okay, and actually get the matrix developed. Once we have the matrix developed, and on your chart paper, you're going to have like what your topic is, you're going to have those procedures kind of listed out, and then you're going to start working to flesh out that matrix. Once we get those matrices developed to a pretty good point, we're going to stop and we're going to do a little bit of a gallery walk. We're not going to be able to work the whole way around the room, but what we're going to do is you're going to shift, and if you've never done a gallery walk, you move from your group of building it to now we'll give you sticky notes and your team will come over to this one and you'll be standing there making sense out of it with your team, like how did they organize this kind of thing. And if you have any suggestions or questions about what they've developed, you'll put it on that note, you'll put it on the paper. We'll give you about 3 to 5 minutes at each one. And then you'll go to the next one and you'll get a chance to preview some of that. And if you have a question like, why were they thinking this? Or why was this considered a prerequisite skill? Or have you thought about this? You'll put it in a note and you'll put it on their chart paper. And we'll hit as many as we can. And this is how you will then gather more specific feedback on your matrix. The last thing that we'll do then after the gallery walk is you'll come back to your original group and you'll have a little bit of a time to address some of the things on those sticky notes. So it might be that you want to update something on your chart. You scribble something out, you add something on, right? We'll give you a little bit of time to kind of update that. And then if there's any sharing out of the whole group at the end, we'll have an opportunity to do that as well. And one of the things I didn't talk about, but you might want to snap a picture of that too. Okay, if nothing else, I will make sure that we end about 5 minutes before 12, at least 5 minutes before 12, to give everybody an opportunity to snap pictures of the different content that's been worked on. Okay? I'm going to bring that slide back up in a little bit, just to remind you of where we're at in terms of the process and help us with those transitions to keep us on track. But when I originally break you out, or when you originally form groups, these are the ones that I'm suggesting, because there's always dealer's choice, right? So if you wanted to work more in place value concepts and you feel like you got a little bit of a start there, but you'd like to really develop that a little bit more because that's more appropriate for your students, there you go. Maybe number lines is a good one. Addition or subtraction algorithms, single digit work, fractions as numbers, that's a personal one that I love. or adding fractions could be one. And you might think that that's going to get real difficult. It doesn't have to be real difficult to get kids engaged with adding fractions. The question is, how are you tackling that, right? So just because you choose what feels like more difficult math doesn't mean you have to attack it to that full-blown piece. You can just think about early engagement, things like that, how you might start building it. Those are some suggestions that I'm putting up to help you with, so you don't have to pull something out of thin air. But if there's something else that you're thinking about and your group says, somebody in the group says, I really want to do this, and the group's okay with that, then you can pick your own piece of content. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to leave that up until we get you into the groups and you guys get your piece of content. And the first thing I want you to do is make sure that you write down what, like you label the top of that content, whatever that is. We have chart paper along the outside of the room. We're a pretty big group. So if you start to stack up in a group or something like that, and you want to get a piece of chart paper and work on a floor, we can do something like that as well. If you say, I'm not going to the chart paper, we're going to form a group in our chairs and we're going to do this like on a sheet of paper, then you could do it on a sheet of paper. It might, we might have to make an adjustment for the gallery walk thing, but we'll figure it out, right? We'll figure it out. Cool? Okay, whether you're going to a chart paper or whether you're working in your seats, I want you to group up. I don't care who you work with, but when you get together, probably about 4 or 5 people in a group, and I want you to come to some consensus on what that topic is, okay? If you do that, start thinking about how you might go about teaching it, and I'll bring us back together.
Grab the sticky.
Here.
All right.
Okay, wait. There we go. Okay, I pulled down the topics for you to work on because I think you guys, most people have them selected, already have them up. I see some novel choices. I like it. So I want to bring us back to the plan, all right? So the first thing that we're working on right now is outlining those procedures, thinking about how you're going to want them to work with this content. Because once you know what you want them to do with place value, adding fractions, or the addition algorithm, or telling time, once you know what you want them to do with that, you'll be able to think about those prerequisites. Okay? So we want to think, how do we want them to engage in this content? What are the prerequisites? Start working on a list of those. Don't worry about organizing it all just yet. If we need more chart paper, I'll get you more chart paper. Okay? That's the part that we're at right now.
What we want to show
We are. We are. We are. Got a little bit more intense the last time. Hey, I'm skipping stuff on here, right? Because if you can't be flexible, you can't teach people, right? Kids or big kids. By the way, I think of you all now as my big kids. Okay? So I own you. In a good way, right? I take ownership, not anyway. Okay, so we skipped some stuff because you guys were doing such great work and moving right into the matrices that I wanted to keep you engaged in that process. So what I'm going to ask is that we take about the next 2 minutes, see what you can finish up in that matrix. At least make sure the outsides you're happy with, so you know the teacher's behavior, right, and the student's behavior, or the antecedent and the behavior that you're looking at. And if you can label anything in the inside, start to do that. And if it's incomplete, that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be complete. It's not about finished product today. Try to do that in the next 3 minutes just to shore up the matrix, because then we're going to get an opportunity to see other people's work, okay? I'll bring you back together in about 3 minutes. We are. Getting there. Okay. Are your heads spinning? Let me tell you this, though. I know you don't necessarily feel confident about it because it's your first time through. I'm seeing some really good stuff. And I'm not seeing you guys go back so far behind the prerequisites so much as what are the prerequisites for this, right? Not what are all the prerequisites that a kid would ever need before they would get up to this. I really like where you're at. I really, really do. So much to the point that best laid plans right out the window. I went, they don't need any structure to this. Let them work. Because I wanted you to be able to maximize your time. So we completely avoided all of that. And I promised you to have an opportunity to go around and see what the other groups have done. So what I would encourage you to do, and I'm going to be quiet here in another minute, what I would encourage you to do in the next couple minutes is you don't have to finish yours, but snap a picture of it so that you can capture some of those things and you can continue to think about them in the future, whatever. What I will say is we're going to collect all those, and hopefully that leads to something, right, be a little bit more formalized down the road, okay? So last little bit, thank you to everybody in the room for all your hard work. Thank you to everybody that was in the webcast, and enjoy the rest of your conference.